Okay, so it's 2 o'clock in the central Texas. Well, I'm in Texas, and central time is 2 o'clock. And of course, in the Eastern time is 3 o'clock. And for some parts in Mexico is 1 o'clock. But we're all together to learn more about the Joint Commission. Let me. The central Texas. Well, I'm in Texas. And sorry about that. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker. We're going to be talking about CGFNS and what CGFNS does for the international nursing community. I have known CGFNS for a long time. I actually took my certification in the 80s, and so I think my number is pretty short compared to the numbers that are right now. So I'm going to introduce Mukul, our main speaker. He's the Director of Alliance for Ethical International Recruitment Practices, Chief Global Affairs Officer for the CGFNS International. Since CGFNS acquisition of the Alliance for Ethical International Recruitment Practices in 2014, he has led that multi-stakeholder initiative to advance fair and ethical recruitment practices of foreign educated nurses. In his time as director, the Alliance has strengthened its voluntary certification program and now certify firms, agencies, what we know as agencies, recruitment agencies, that recruit a majority of nurses migrating to the United States. This is such an amazing job that is being done by CGFNS. And I will welcome Mukul Bakshi. And if you don't mind introducing Maggie, that will help us tremendously. Welcome, both of you.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction and for the invitation. Maggie, if you have a chance, could you pick up this, pull up the slides at your convenience? It's a pleasure to be here. As you know, Ms. Selena said, I am the Chief Global Affairs Officer at CGFNS International. I've been here for 9 years, and I'm joined today by two of my colleagues, Maggie Mayer, who is the Alliance Program Coordinator, and she'll talk a little about the Alliance and the work that division of CGFNS does, and Karen Scipio-Skinner, who is the Client Engagement Regional Executive at CGFNS, and in that capacity connects with the state boards of nursing and other key stakeholders. So with that, and as Maggie's pulling up the slides, let me tell you a little about CGFNS. CGFNS has been around for quite some time. In fact, 47 years at this point almost. It was established in 1977 by the American Nurses Association and the National League for Nursing as a multinational, multi-professionals credential evaluation organization. What we do is we essentially enable professionals like yourselves to bring and use your education and experience across borders, as well as to ensure comparability to a domestic workforce like the U.S. We play an important role in migration and licensure for those seeking work in the US, Canada, and New Zealand. And we processed almost 4 million applications from all around the world. Next slide. So some of you may be very familiar with this process. Some of you might have some questions. We have some time today, so feel free to jump in and throw questions in the chat, or we'll talk in the Q&A later. But this process can seem very complicated, and so I want to kind of clarify the kind of couple of pieces there. So there's two pieces that most people are thinking about when they're a nurse who wants to get to work in the United States. One is the immigration process, and that is something you go through USCIS for, and it involves getting a visa. For many Mexican in particular, it would be essentially an employment-based visa like the EB3, or more likely the TN visa or the trained NAFTA visa, which is available to people from Canada and Mexico. Even if you get the visa, though, you need a license to practice as well. And so CGFNS handles kinds of both pieces of that process. So let's talk about what those things are. So could you go back up, Maggie? Sorry. So there's a background screen, and then there's the credential verification authentication piece, and these are a couple of pieces. One is things like your transcripts and licenses. Those have to be validated, and they're validated against our educational database, and we do document forensics to make sure they're authentic. Then there's a test of nursing knowledge. This could be the NCLEX or the CGFNS qualifying exam, which is part of our certification program. So to prove that you have the requisite nursing knowledge. And finally, a test of English language proficiency. TOEFL and IELTS have been the traditional tests. Just starting about last year, we've accepted a bunch of additional tests as well. So including PTE, OET, Michigan, etc. So basically, those are the components that we're looking at for your application. So we verify and authenticate those documents. Then we have to evaluate them. So there's two pieces. As I mentioned, for the visa piece, you would get what's called a visa screen certificate, which is a certificate that you can literally bring to the embassy for your interview, or in the case of a TN visa, right to the border for admission to work in the United States. And then separately, you need a license to practice. In the U.S., states handle that. So in each state, you need a license. And the Credential Evaluation Service report is an advisory report that CGFNS issues to the Board of Nursing to help them make a determination as to whether to give you a license. So that's the process in a nutshell. We're going to jump into a little bit of those different steps. Maggie? So there are many programs, and there are kind of three categories of them. So I kind of highlighted a very high level the CES and the Visa Screen program that are in bold. There's the Credential Evaluation Program, and so that's where we're looking at documents and evaluating them and issuing an advisory report to an organization like a Board of Nursing or a nursing school, for example. So the CES Credentials Evaluation Service Professional Report is the typical report that we issue many of, and those go to a state board of nursing to help them decide whether to issue a license. There's also a similar academic report that is used for academic admissions to nursing school. In these cases, we're taking all those documents that you gave us and all the information, and we're making an advisory opinion. We're evaluating it and providing that. In some cases, we just do verification. So that middle piece of that column where we're just looking at your documents and transcripts and saying they're valid, but we're not actually evaluating them to say that they're comparable or not. These include the Credentials Verification Service for New York State. So if you are looking to get licensed in New York State, you could use that pathway because that's the New York State Education Department does the evaluation piece. And if you're going to New Zealand, we have a CVS service for New Zealand as well. And then finally, certification. So certification is different because instead of giving an advisory report, looking at transcripts or things of that sort, we're actually issuing a certificate based on that evaluation. And so the biggest, of course, here is the Visa Screen Credentials Assessment Service, which is required, as I mentioned, for immigration purposes to work using an occupational visa in the U.S. There's also the CGFNS certification program, which is used by people taking our qualifying exam, and a program for global nurse consultants. But the three main categories, you don't have to worry too much about them. But I think the biggest difference is that verification is simply looking at the documents and saying they're authentic. Evaluation is taking those same documents, and then after saying they're authentic, saying, is this person comparable or similar to someone in the US? And then certification is the step beyond that. Instead of an advisory report, it's a certificate that you're granted that you can use for its stated purpose. Thanks. So what is the CES report? So as I mentioned, it's prepared for and sent to the U.S. Board of Nursing. It provides a detailed analysis of the credentials received outside the U.S. So any Mexican who's looking to get a TN visa or something like that, and to work in a state in the U.S. would get a CES report. It includes a couple of things. So it includes a statement of comparability to say that you're comparable to U.S. standards for entry to practice. It's advisory to the State Board of Nursing. So the state board is the one that makes the ultimate decision as to whether to issue a license or not. And may have different requirements, including English, depending on the recipient. So some state boards may require English language from us. Others might require you to send English language scores on your own, and others might not have a requirement at all. In general, these reports are valid for 1 year. So if, a couple years later, you're looking to get licensed in the state, you would have to get a new report. Next slide. Okay. So some of the components of the report. One is completion of full upper secondary school education. So essentially what's called equivalent to like a high school education. You also have to complete a first level, which is generally the registered nurse category, or second level, generally called the licensed practical nurse category, nursing program from a government approved or accredited nursing school. And the nursing program must consist of basically the instruction requirements that are similar to the US. So there are major areas of nurses in which you have to complete coursework and clinical practice. And this includes, adult med nursing or surgical nursing. This includes nursing care of children. This includes maternal or infant nursing. And finally, it includes psychiatric or mental health nursing. It also involves the validation of licenses held by an applicant. So any licenses have to be validated as being unencumbered, meaning there's nothing, no disciplinary action or anything like that against them. Next slide. So that's the kind of the state piece for licensure. As I mentioned, that kind of overall approach, there's the visa screen requirement that is required for occupational visas to work in the US. So visa screen certificates satisfy the federal screening requirements that are set by 1996 immigration law. They provide a certificate, so they call it a determinative report because there's no advisory aspect to them. It's just a piece of paper that's either given to you, or now in these cases, it's digitally given to you, but that you take that certificate to the embassy or to the border to CBP. They're valid for 5 years. And as I keep highlighting, it's only a prerequisite for an immigration visa. It does not grant you licensure to work in the US. So you need this to get a visa to work in the US, but you need the separate CES report and then state licensure to actually practice as a nurse in the United States. Next slide. And so as I kind of highlighted at the beginning, the components here are English language, the qualifying exam or RN, or NCLEX RN is the kind of components of a test of nursing knowledge, and then the credentials evaluation of your transcripts and your license. And all of those go into being issued as visa screen certificate. Next slide. So Graciela had the thought to send us a few of the questions that you had before we even met today. And so hopefully I will get many of those here, and we're happy to talk in addition. We have plenty of time in the Q&A to go much further. So once an application's been submitted, there is an applicant portal called CGFNS Connect where you can follow along throughout the process. I know one of the biggest questions we often get is what are processing times? And I wish I could give you an easy answer on that. They vary quite a bit, right? In the past, we've had long waits because of application volumes. Those are down quite a bit now, so that should not be an impediment. But the bigger issue is case complexity. So sometimes there are issues at every stage in the process. So obviously documents have to be sent from the primary source. So like a school or regulatory authority has to send us information. And if they are delays in them sending to us, it takes us longer, of course, to evaluate, to issue. And then even if we do get the document, sometimes there are questions about the documents. Say there's something about the document that we have to re-authenticate. So a signature doesn't look the same as it should, or there's some question about some piece of the application, then that has to be resent and then sent back, and that obviously delays the process. So I would say in general, as a ballpark, you're looking at a couple months throughout the process, but that can vary quite a bit based on your personal circumstances. So you want to leave as much time as possible to address any of those concerns, but feel free to reach out, of course, to us if there are questions as you go through that process. You want to complete your application fully and accurately to prevent delays. So as I mentioned before, there are delays all throughout the process. Anything that is done incorrectly can cause issues. So even in the initial application, I get things about names. Somebody types their name wrong in, or their date of birth. Those two in particular are much more complex to fix. So I'd be very careful about those two at the beginning. But even other errors often have to be corrected. And so you want to be as careful as possible to be accurate to make sure that things get through quickly. You should absolutely look for application updates in the portal or connect and be proactive about following up on documents. So and make sure they're being sent to us and following up if they're not if they should have been received by us and it's been more than 4 or 5 weeks, you definitely want to check to make sure that they're tracked and that we find those documents quickly. If you have a recruiter or a immigration attorney, you can also designate them as an authorized agent on your account, and that way you can monitor the progress of your application, and they can also talk to us on your behalf if you do that. And if you have concerns about your application, we have applicant navigation services. You can reach us. You can reach us by phone. You can submit a question online through the portal. We also have social media opportunities and things of that to reach out to us as well. And we're launching our omni-channel effort, so there'll be more and more ways to connect with us if you have any questions. And I think, one of the things that we're very much looking forward to do is making the process, which can be very difficult and challenging at times, as transparent and as easy as we possibly can. So we're very much looking forward to working with you to do that. Next slide. So I want to pivot for a moment to the Alliance, and I'm going to hand it over to Maggie to talk about the Alliance and how, as a division of CGFNS, it complements the organization's work. Maggie?
Hi, so I'm going to talk about the Alliance. Mukul has already shared some of the ways and the programs that CGFNS offers to help professionals bring their education and experience across borders. The Alliance for Ethical International Recruitment Practices is a division of CGFNS that also complements that work. When health professionals are coming across the border, the Alliance is working to ensure that recruitment and employment practices are fair, ethical, and transparent, as is defined by our code. The Alliance's Healthcare Code for Ethical International Recruitment and Employment Practices establishes best practices for fair and transparent recruitment of health professionals into the U.S. It includes sections like recruiter and employer accountability, as well as respect for sending countries of health professionals. And it also addresses the rights and responsibilities of migrant healthcare workers in that process, including things like the right to access justice, the right to receive support for clinical and cultural orientation, and the right to move freely without coercion. The Alliance works in 3 main ways. One of those is certifying recruitment firms or recruitment agencies that comply with our code. They demonstrate compliance through application process and through a survey of the health professionals that they work with, and then they submit their practices to additional oversight by the Alliance. We also inform and empower health professionals who are migrating. We do this both through one-on-one calls with nurses or health professionals who reach out to us with questions about their recruitment process or concerns about their employer. And we also do this through creating a lot of resources. One of our most popular resources is our recruitment guide. The recruitment guide offers red flags and green flags when you're looking at an employment contract. It gives a list of our certified ethical recruiters, and it includes some helpful resources for nurses and healthcare workers who arrive in the US, including nursing associations, labor unions, and legal support. And then finally, we conduct research alongside CGFNS on trends in the recruitment and healthcare workforce landscape. You can find all of those information about all of those main ways that we work on our website. And if you have any questions, if you have ethical concerns about your recruitment process, if you have a contract that you're not sure about signing, you can always reach out to discuss your situation confidentially with the email address on the screen or through our website. And with that, I'll pass it back off to Mukul, I think, to answer some of your questions.
Great, thank you, Maggie. And you have Maggie's email address. If you have questions following this, she can get them to the right place. So she'll hold it up for another second, and then we'll take down the thing so we can see all of you in bigger form. We also have a Spanish language version of this document, which I think was just sent in the chat. So you can absolutely take a look at that. It kind of highlights both at a high level the CGFNS offers and the Alliance offers. So with that, I want to thank Graciela for the opportunity to speak today. I wanted to provide that brief 20-minute presentation, and then see what questions you have that we can address on this call or subsequently as needed.
Thank you very much. And commonly, I have there is this group of people that have a hard time speaking online. But if you don't feel comfortable asking the question in English, go ahead and ask it in Spanish, and I'll be able to translate for you. If you prefer to type it, then you can use the chat, and I will they are able to read the chat. I also have Slido set up for question and answers if you have any. But I see David has the hand up, so let's see what David has to say. Go ahead, David. David Franco.
Oh, yes. Hello, thank you for being here with us. I would like to ask if CGFNS offers a multi-state license, or is it just a Texas state license?
That's a great question. So we don't offer licenses. What we do is we issue that CES advisory report to a state board of nursing that then decides to issue the license. So, for example, you were mentioning Texas. So as many of you might know, there is something called the Nurse Licensure Compact, the ENLC, which is a compact of dozens of states that choose to recognize other state licenses in that state. So when you apply, you would get the CES report from the state that which you want to get the license from, and that state would issue you a license. That license may be either a single state license or a compact license, as it's called, depending on the particular circumstances. So generally, to get a compact license, it has to be in the state of your residence, right? And you have to meet the requirements, including background checks, et cetera, that are required for the compact. So really, either way, you'll need a CES report from us. But whether it's a one state license or a compact license would vary based on the particular state and what your kind of personal circumstances are.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Okay, one of the questions that I have heard before is about the transition. When you CGFNS transition documents or send documents, the evaluation has been completed, all the paperwork has been submitted, so everything is ready to be sent to the State Board of Nursing of choice, and most common Texas or whatever state. Do you in that scenario, do you have a time frame?
So once all the documents are received, and how long it takes us to issue a report, is that what you're saying?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I would say we don't have a specific time frame because it varies a lot based on that. But I would say at this point, it's in the several weeks category. I know at certain times in the past it was in the months, several months. So I would say within a couple months generally would be a kind of a general ballpark, but again with the kind of asterisk or caveat that it can vary considerably. But if it's taking longer than that, you can look in the portal or reach out to us and we can take a look at your application specifically, see what the issues are. In general now, the backlogs that were an issue in the past are not. So delays are more about your getting through the document phase as opposed to the evaluation phase.
Okay. I'm in several platforms, and what I try to do is I try to advocate for the nurses who are Hispanic, mostly Mexican, but that is one of the questions. Yeah. CGFNS had said, or is there is a report saying, yes, everything is complete. We send the report to the State Board of Nursing, but the State Board of Nursing has not received it. That's the question.
Oh, that's the question. Yes.
So that if that happens, what I usually try to say, well, wait for this long, and then if nothing, then start acting. Yeah. But will there be something better to say in this scenario?
So sorry, I was saying once the documents are received, but then the time to give the evaluation. Once we've issued a report, it's pretty quick at this point, right? So we're just sending those reports daily to the state boards. So I would say it should be this is not, a few years ago, there's more time involved. But today we're electronically dispersing those to the state board. So once we've said we'd issued a report, the state board should have it the next day at the very latest. So you want to give them a couple days to process it, but if it's more than a couple of days, I would say reach out to the state board or us, depending on one of the other first. But that should be very quick. Once we've issued a report, they should have it, is the short answer.
Perfect. And those mistakes that you're saying, I have seen common mistakes that I deal with whenever people ask me is the names and the date of birth. Most commonly, the date of birth is because the change in how we type it and how Mexico and some other countries type it, because we do month, day, and year, and most commonly they do date, month, and year. So that's one of the things to be extremely careful, because like you said, is it may be one of the most difficult things to clarify. Yeah. And the other common mistake that I encounter is the ID. To make sure that the ID, well, and not necessarily for CGFNS, but it's whenever they're gonna take the test, the NCLEX, because they have done all the credential and they're gonna get the ATT, but the ATT has to be tied to all the documents. So it's very important that whatever document they're gonna present has the valid date that they submitted and the name. So that has been some of the things. I don't know if anybody has a question.
Yeah, I just want to add to before we get to the next question. ATT, I think most of you might know, but that's the authorization to test. That's the basically the form that's required to actually take the NCLEX, which is a requirement for state licensure. So just want to clarify that. Yeah. And absolutely right about the date of birth. Obviously, the U.S. does it very differently than most of the world, so I know that's a big issue. But yeah, getting the name and date of birth, those are the two hardest things to change, because we have security requirements around that have to be addressed. So absolutely.
Absolutely. Now, in reference to the classes, the content, there were 4 areas mentioned there. Some of the state boards require 5 areas, which other than the ones that were in that you mentioned, which was adult, medical, surgical, pediatric, OB, and psychiatry. The other one that some of the State Board of Nursing require are geriatric. So what I want to say to the audience is that if you encounter that with the state of boards and you're applying, you have to comply with whoever has the higher standards. So if the State Board of Nursing is asking for geriatric, you gotta make sure that there is geriatric. The other difference is in the requirement of the test, the English test score. A CGFNS test score is higher than the test score for some of the State Board of Nursing. If that happens, then comply with the one that has the highest requirement. And it's just to make it easier.
Yep. I think that's a really great point. I would add a couple things about English in particular. One is, the making sure not just the scores meet both the federal visa screen standard, but also the state board standard, and also recognition that different states may have different tests that they accept, right? So, we accept for visa screen many tests, including OET, PTE, etc., whereas some states may only accept some subset of the tests. So if you want to get a license in that state, you want to make sure that you're taking the appropriate tests. So that's a really good point I want to emphasize. The other I want to emphasize is that CGFNS is on record as arguing to the federal government that the current scores are not comparable, meaning some tests are not have a different level of English language proficiency than others. And so I would expect that there might be some adjustment to some of those scores in early next year.
Yes, and I was involved in several of the tests when they were setting the scores. Yeah. And some of them are just tests. They're not necessarily, and because it's English in general, it's not nursing English. So you have to be aware of that. Otherwise, you may not reach the score. But one point that you made, Mukul, was there are some tests that are accepted by CGFNS. Gotta make sure that that test is accepted by the State Board of Nursing. Otherwise, you're gonna have to take two. So always inform yourself about the test. And of course, the two most commonly accepted are the TOEFL and the IELTS. Those are not the only ones, but those are the most commonly accepted throughout. Would you agree with that, that those are the most commonly?
Yes, those are the most commonly accepted. Those are accepted by most states. Some of the newer tests like PT and OT are accepted by, more and more states, but certainly fewer than IELTS or TOEFL.
And another thing that I usually try to work with is the fact that some nurses, some Mexican, Hispanic nurses, even though they're not going to work in a state, let's say New York, they try to take the test in New York because New York doesn't require English.
Yes.
My advice commonly is, if you're going to require a visa, a residency, you're going to have to do the visa screen, and that requires the English test. So think about that whenever you're making choices. That way, you don't have to apply for New York, get your license, and then get the endorsement, and still have to take the English before you can get your documentation to work.
Very good advice. I agree with that.
Yes. Thank you, Karen. Karen is saying in the chat that always, and that's a great advice, always check both websites, the CGFNS website and the BON. And what she's saying is in the CGFNS, there is, well, maybe I will let you talk about that.
Yeah, Karen, thank you for that point. On the CGF's website, there's kind of by state what the requirements are, so you can look at the different states and what the requirements are. They also include what are the English language tests and requirements, along with all the other requirements for state licensure. So that's a great point, Karen.
And let me clarify on that. On that website, as it is, commonly it says, for example, Texas, do not send English scores. And people are thinking, oh, then Texas doesn't require English. But I think it's backwards, because Texas requires English. You don't have to send the English course to CGFNS.
That's exactly correct. So for some states, they want the English language test to be sent along with our CES report, and others prefer to receive the English language test directly. So you'll want to clarify if it needs to go through us. For some states, then you have to forward the English language to us, and then we forward it to the state. Other states will get it directly, so then you have to make sure that you tell the testing vendor to send the scores directly to the Board of Nursing.
That's correct. And let me tell you, I don't know that Mukul mentioned why CGFNS was originally created in, I think it was in the 70s.
Yeah, 1977. That's right.
And the main reason is to protect the nurses, because nurses were coming here and taking the test, and if they didn't pass, the contract was not being upheld, and then they have to stay here because some of the recruiters will not pay the fly back to their country. As you know, Mexico is right next door, but going across the ocean to another country was very hard. And so with the certification, which was the first thing, we were able to stay here because we passed a test actually the test was, you were able to take the test in your country and then have a certain level of confidence that you were going to be successful in the NCLEX. So CGFNS was created to be friendly to nurses. The complexity has been increasing as the world has been expanding, as nurses have been coming, and the volume that you have, you mentioned millions, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the millions of people have come through us, and I will say just in the last couple of years, from 2018 to 2023, the number of people who applied for our visa screen service, for example, is up by more than 100%. So, there's a big increase in the last few years. That will change in the next couple of years because the number of visas available has dropped. But for Mexicans in particular who have access to that TN visa I talked about, that won't be an issue for any of you.
Yeah, exactly. And we're privileged. I have spoken to several leaders in the nursing world, hospitals here in the United States that are now saying Mexico is the answer. Canada is also having some issues. So this is a time that they're looking at us. So we need to make sure that we understand the process correctly so that we don't have as many frustrations. My advice is always make sure that you do everything to facilitate the work for the schools, because many schools are not familiar with the process. And then also, in our case in Mexico, the licensure agency, which is Profesiones, because again, they're not that familiar with the complexity and the differences in paperwork. So facilitate as much as you can the processes so that this can be going smoothly for all of us. Well, I'm only here to advocate for you, but I always feel part of you, either one. So I really appreciate. I don't know if there is anybody else who has a question. I am looking at the other platforms, but I don't see questions. Anybody else has any questions before we close the session? I'll take that as a no.
Great. Well, thank you so much again for the invitation to come speak here today. I know Maggie and I very much appreciate the opportunity. And I want to thank all of you for spending the time to learn a little bit more about the process. Maggie, of course, put her email address on that slide. We'll put it again in the chat. If there are questions, about any of the stuff, we're happy to answer it as well. And beyond that, I wanted to say that a couple kind of key targets is one is, as Graciela said, is just know the process up front to understand as much as you can. If there are questions, follow up. We are here to be reached. We have a phone line and you can contact us, and we're quite responsive at this point. And then know your rights from an ethical recruitment perspective as well. So as Maggie mentioned, the Alliance has recruitment guide. There's a lot of information on choosing an employer and a recruiter. And so use that information to make the right choice for your career and your family and personal life, et cetera. So we're very happy to kind of help you as much as we can on this journey and make the process as seamless as possible. So thank you.
Well, I also thank each one of you for being here with us. Of course, CGFNS for agreeing to participate with us, and each one of those of you who were able to stay with us. I know that there were several who are working right now, so this is being broadcast to YouTube. So I'll share the link with everyone so that you can see this presentation. Thank you again, everyone, and I hope you have a blessed night.